Right now? Yeah, I'll try and keep that brief in mind. Thank you so much, everyone here at the library, for bringing me here from San Francisco. It's a great honor. Looking at this perplexing title, about a month after I wrote it, I thought, well, God, people aren't really going to understand what that means off the top of their heads. And Jane and I can talk about this after I spend a few moments talking about my own work. But the things to keep in mind here with this title are the survey and the survey image, the sublime, certainly, and anthropic, meaning human-based. And I mean it specifically in relation to a term that's being used a lot these days, the Anthropocene. And it's debatable as a concept, but many geologists feel that humans are now on the planet so powerful and so all-pervasive that we are the most important, and our actions are the most important geological record happening right now. So with that, I want to say again how awesome it is to be in this library as a bookmaker. The book form is my preferred form, and I think it's just kind of a wonderful place to do this. So again, thank you. I think of myself as being interested in planetary landscape. I'm basically a landscape photographer. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry has always been an inspiration, not only for his fantastic drawings, but in terms of piloting. I'm also a pilot, as the introduction mentioned. This is me in my little tiny plane. It weighs about 600 pounds and has a 100 horsepower engine. That's me on the left with a very large camera that shot 5-inch roll film that I no longer use because my back gave out and I had to have surgery because it weighed about 20 pounds. And I was always shooting to the left. My interest in aviation was forged early on by my great-uncle Richard, who, if he were alive today, would be very pleased that I would be speaking in the Linda Hall. He was a neurosurgeon and an aviator back when aviation was particularly glamorous. This is him. This is he. And he wound up being the first person to fly around the world in a private seaplane, the Asulinak, which is Greenlandic for what the hell. He did this in the early 30s, and he was kind of my grandfather figure and rather glamorous for a little boy interested in aviation. I soloed at age 14 in gliders and had a private pilot's license by 16, in large part due to Dick. He also went on to do things like run the American Geographical Society and things like that. So he was something of an explorer, very much, and I honor my ancestor Richard tonight. This is my plane, which looks like a cartoon, but is actually quite a capable tool. And the reason I fly this tiny little plane is that, as you can see, there's no strut running from the wing to the fuselage. So nothing to block my field of view. It also is very slow and steady, which is what you want for an aerial platform. In 1999, we're gonna talk about my archival works predominantly here tonight, because this is a context of science. And both these books, 100 Suns and Full Moon, were made with what we would call found images in archives. And they're both made from photographs that were certainly not made with any kind of artistic intent. So I, as an artist, went into these piles of pictures and made something somewhat after my own interests, but also with great fidelity to what I felt to be the fundamentals and truths of the archives. So, starting with Full Moon, it's basically it started with a book, and then there was an exhibition that traveled the world. I wanted to look at the Apollo archives beyond the footprint of Buzz Aldrin, beyond the flags, and beyond the sort of 10 images or so that we all know very, very, very thoroughly, so thoroughly that we don't even really see them anymore. And put your mind back, pre-digital, pre-internet, to the mid-90s, and NASA had this pile of 33,000 pictures shot by the astronauts with beautiful Hasselblad medium format cameras. And everything was numbered. It was all very well taken care of. The originals were in a frozen vault underground, as they should be. They did beautiful master dupes. They were all cataloged, but there was no way to actually find these images, see them in any kind of easy way. And I basically camped out in Houston at a Motel 6 until I just wouldn't go away. The public relations office said, "Oh, here's the folder," and it's all the press pics that we know so well. And I really wanted to kind of get in deeper, and finally they let me into this building 2 miles across Johnson Space Center called Building 424, which is a lot like this library, actually, in terms of having a concrete, many floors down below, and wonderful curators who don't have to worry about skin cancer. And I was then able to look at every single image in the 33,000 archive and edit myself. Maybe 2,000 images. I just want to say one thing about the sort of the technical aspect of what I did, which was very significant then and is not significant now. I was the first person to digitize the Apollo archive. And why is that important beyond the obvious things of accessibility and so forth? It's important because in space, there's no atmosphere to soften anything. You get these images made with a kind of clarity, almost a hallucinatory sharpness, because there's nothing to diffuse the light. It's very, very linear, contrasty light. It's quite extraordinary, place and extraordinary photographs. And the method by which NASA would make these images available to the public, if you could figure out what you wanted, which was almost impossible, was to give a duplicate of a duplicate of a duplicate of a duplicate, and then a really bad print made by a lab in Dallas, and they would crop things. And essentially what you get was a very soft print, a very blurry print. And so effectively, to actually I worked with NASA for about 2 years to get permission to digitally scan at film grain resolution these pictures. And it wiped away a kind of haze and a fuzz that this material had known up till that point. And so it was quite a revelatory moment. Now all 33,000 images are on Flickr and Instagram, and NASA went on to properly digitize the archive fully after I did it. So that was kind of important, but really as an artist, what I wanted to do was, I don't know how many of you have seen the Apollo show, just in which gallery is it, on that side? This side. Do check it out, it's really terrific. But I set out to do exactly the opposite of what this show here tonight does, which is to say I wanted to remove all the technology that I could, all the space hardware, all the history, the 440,000 people that actually worked on Apollo, and just work on and present the moon as a place, as a landscape, and put it in context of landscape representation historically, as well as this moment of first contact. So to really just kind of focus on the grandeur and indeed the sublimity of the work itself. In any archive, it's super fun. You go in, you think, okay, I'm going to go see a lot of moon pictures, and then you find things that you did not expect to find. This was one of the key things that I did not expect to find. This is actually the first Earthrise seen by human eyes. We know ad nauseum the pictures that were made about 5 exposures after this, after Frank Borman, the commander, said, grab the color camera, right? But I happen to really like the black and white images because the acuity and the fineness of detail far surpass the Ektachrome images. This is panatomic film, which has a very wide latitude and can take great degrees of brightness and darkness and hold them together at once. It's a little on the bright side with this projector, but that's okay. So again, the intensity of this light was what drove me as an artist through this very long 5-year process. It just seemed so natural to open the book once we're on the surface of the moon with a long shadow of human presence hitting a landscape that had heretofore been untouched for 4 billion years. This is a great image of Al Bean looking like a cowboy. His compatriot, I think Pete Conrad, is in the exhibition classically with the astronaut reflected in the visor. I'm fond of this one, though, because it's like, you know, I'll meet you at the OK Corral. And I was super happy to see the level of sophistication here in this exhibition. They indeed also, I'm assuming that would be Eric. Did you do that, Eric? Yeah, Eric put that together. He included something that I included, and I feel like I was the first to publish this, the untouched lunar surface, as well as Buzz Aldrin's famous footprint. And I learned tonight or this afternoon, that he was instructed to take the before and after because it was actually a scientific part of the scientific agenda to photograph just how deep his footprint would go into the soil. But really, the crux of what I was doing was just right here. Right, we have a moon, and then we have a human moment. And I was interested as much in the human moment. I was really interested in trying to delineate the moon itself. The Sublime, this is a solar wind collector. I just think it's like this exquisite kind of capturing of this intensity of light on the surface of the moon. The thing to remember about this entire body of work is that essentially it is a government-funded geological survey expedition. The astronauts brought back 842 pounds of rocks, and they brought back their 33,000 images. The geologists were thrilled to have the rocks, but they almost wanted more the pictures because they showed the context from which the rocks had been plucked. Here you can see a geological hammer and a collection cup. And like the Apollo missions, we have Timothy O'Sullivan's great railroad survey work and the collection cup and a bottle for scale. So I'm going to be showing some of O'Sullivan's pictures, which have always been an inspiration to me throughout my photographic career. Emphasized a lot of kind of poking and prodding and measuring in the work. This is Dave Scott, commander of Apollo 15. You can see the richness of the blacks in this image. That's actually in the film. That's not an artifact of printing. But they're just very, to my mind, they're luscious, very beautiful pictures, as well as being neutral survey documents. I love this picture because it's got footprints and the ubiquitous piece of trash here. This is a little dropped geological collection bag. I think of this as a Zen garden. This is rover tracks, and just to give you a sense of how strange, it looks familiar, the moon. It's a sort of a semi-familiar landscape, but because there's no atmosphere and our eyes have evolved for haze to judge distance, this is actually 8,000 feet. It looks like something you might very casually, snowboard down. I couldn't resist Timothy O'Sullivan's classic image of his dark room in the Carson Basin, the Carson Sink, I think, yeah. And we'll see some of my pictures of the Carson Sink later. Again, just very, very lunar environments. And of course, the moon is a desert. Yeah, I think of, in the history of photography, I think of Robert Adams, I think of Louis Baltz, I think of the new topographers here. Another great O'Sullivan, extremely lunar, he was the original planetary landscape guy in Nevada. So these composite pans I put together after my own interests, and here we have two rovers. This is Apollo 15. This is an eroded lava river that runs for 160 kilometers and is about a mile across. It's really quite an amazing feature. These were shown, exhibited 4 feet high by 16 feet long. This is an installation in London at the time. Moving from the moon to 100 suns, oftentimes, I should say, full moon was a very, very large publishing kind of phenomenon. We sold about almost 500,000 books, which for a big coffee table book is quite something. And we did 12 editions globally. And it was really kind of this phenomenon at the time. And publishers would say, "What's next, Mike? Mars?" And I'd say, "No, that's not really what I'm not really a space guy." But what did seem to be logical was to go from the intensity of that light in space to an investigation of human-created light itself, which was the book and exhibition 100 Suns. And this book was done in 6 editions in 2003, and this was a journey into atmospheric tests, nuclear tests that the United States did between 1945 and 1962, and very much also survey work. This is an image really created by Harold Edgerton, who figured out how to make an exposure within the first millionths of a second of detonation via an electromagnetic shutter. And so the photographs in the early days of the bomb really allowed scientists to begin to understand what was happening, because it was really beyond their comprehension. One of the things that I was startled to find in this archive was the presence of soldiers and people near these detonations. In the 50s, soldiers were put deliberately near the blasts by the Army to create a nuclear-hardened force. And of course, they all died, unfortunately, of early cancer. That said, you notice these lines here. These were rockets set off just before the detonation so that as it was being filmed, the invisible shock wave and expansion could be measured. So photography was being used as a kind of ruler. More people quite close to the detonation. It's a test called Stokes. A test called Climax here. The names of these tests function as a kind of opposition to the 100 images in the book. But you also see the rocket ruler, as it were, right there. It's easy to play with surreality in these images. This is a Navy test of what happens when you have a blimp near an atomic explosion. And obviously what happens is it gets punctured and falls down to the ground. This is an image that I particularly like because it's so classically the American West. These are all at the Nevada test site, 60 miles north of Las Vegas. And I think of this book as very much a landscape book. That's actually not the sun. That's a detonation at 20,000 feet. If you look carefully down here, you can see the shadows are all long and low, and the sun is actually over here to the right. It's a test called John. And this is a very quick, hasty movement through this, but in 1944, 1945, we detonated Trinity, right? So Oppenheimer recited his Bhagavad Gita, brighter than the light of 1,000 suns, now I am become death, the destroyer, in New Mexico. And 7 years later, now that was splitting the atom. 7 years later, tool-bearing humans figured out how to fuse the atom. And at that moment, I would argue, because they created effectively their own star, right, with the hydrogen bomb, which this is the first image of. This is Test Mike, which was in Inuitak Atoll in the Marshall Islands. At that moment in time, I would argue, in landscape terms, that humans became architects of their own sublime, irrevocably. Before this moment in time, the sublime was generally the province of the divine or of vast natural forces. And after this point, the divine arguably still exists, natural forces still exists, but we are really a major, major, major force on the planet. So now we're going to jump briefly to some of my own negative making, image making. This is early desert work from the early aughts. And when I made this image, and I showed this image to Sandy Phillips at the SF Museum of Modern Arts, she and I did Full Moon together there. She looked at me and she said, "Mike, are you trying to see God?" And I sort of just pled the fifth and didn't respond. But I think looking back, it's been 15, 20 years since that. I think I am kind of trying to see God, however we want to describe her. And that's, as time goes on, I want to look clearly at what I see, but I also certainly seek a kind of intensity and beauty in the midst of a fairly crisp look at what we do as humans in the landscape. This early work was certainly influenced by all that lunar time spent on the surface of the moon. I started making these large, 3 feet high by 44-inch wide handmade books, which I still do to this day, and make in the studio. I have, since starting work on this larger project, I think I have 19 of these big books done by now on various sort of subjects, from Los Angeles to the Mojave Desert to Las Vegas, Phoenix. These are some of the published versions of these big books. They're based on the big books. The one in the front is the one that I'll be talking about mostly tonight. But super quick, this is one I did called LA Day, LA Night, which is a sort of a complicated book object form with 2 spines joined by a common board. It's called a dos-a-do binding. LA Day, which unfortunately is just a little bit blown out here, and kind of really trying to go deeply into a white sky versus the black sky of space. A lot of diffusion in the air in LA, aka smog. Some night work that I did shortly thereafter. This is about 2005, drifting over the extraordinary endless vastness of LA, a man-made celestial vault. More recent work from 2016, where I went back and did night work over LA with super sensitive digital cameras with the goal of turning night into a kind of harsh day, almost an overwhelming electrification. This was a book I did with Radius called The Bingham Mine, which looks at the largest human excavation on the planet. It's 20 miles outside of Great Salt Lake, or Salt Lake City, and effectively is the copper mine that electrified America. I think of this as a kind of city in reverse, or an architecture of subtraction. This is work I did on Las Vegas, where I was really looking at mining and development, housing developments, and how they kind of blur in places like Nevada. This was done mostly after the economic collapse in 2008. So a lot of these developments were in deep foreclosure. This is the latest effort, which was indeed published in August, and which I'm naturally most excited about. The goal here was to go to the emptiest places in America left, which would be this area shown in this map called the Great Basin, where all the water drains in. It's Nevada and Utah. Go to the emptiness and see what you could do with those spaces. And because I'm me and I always tend to wind up photographing humans and what humans do in the land, I wound up focusing on the edge of the Bonneville Salt Flats. So these are all marks made by vehicles moving through these edges of the salt pan that flood every winter and then dry out every summer. That looks like snow, but it's actually salt blown directionally after winter storms. So spatially here, we just go into a kind of complete loss of bearings. Is this, are these neutrinos in an electron microscopy kind of image? The black areas here, this is where a motorcycle has broken through the thin layer of salt and spewed out the mud underneath that layer of salt. Layer and layer and layer. So you're seeing year after year after year of layers here. So probably about 7 or 8 years of mark making. They're very painterly. This is on the other side. This is Lake Lahontan, so more on the Nevada side. This is one of the few images in the work where we have natural marks happening. This is cattle in search of water, these tracks here. And obviously, the concept here is to examine Pleistocene lake beds, right? So 10,000 years ago, Lake Lahontan, historic Lake Lahontan, covered most of Nevada, and historic Lake Bonneville covered a great deal of Utah. So we're sort of looking at inland oceans. This is the Carson Sink, a different view than Timothy O'Sullivan's darkroom with his mules. This is the city grid of Burning Man, which is a temporary city that lasts for about, the event that it's built for lasts for a week, but it's out there for about 2 months every year and holds about 80,000 people. And so, this is previous work from Phoenix, but to move from the literal documentary to a more abstract imaging of the city grid was very satisfying for me. This is that same grid after winter storms have blurred it. And with that, I'm almost done. We go back to Timothy O'Sullivan as a kind of inspiration. And I guess the final point I'd make is, neutral scientific material can be an incredible mine for things that we don't tend to think of as a scientific approach. Here's Timothy O'Sullivan ostensibly imaging a steam crack, yes. And he's put a figure in here to measure and give scale. But the end result is a rather otherworldly, ghostly, and extraordinarily powerful piece of work, which many people would view as art. Whether or not Timothy O'Sullivan would is another question, and Jane and I can talk about that. And whether it's legitimate for the contemporary art world to look at work like this and say, wow, that is so profound. This is a wonderful image where he has a figure here looking into a hot spring. And I am going to close with that because I just think it's, these are hot springs in the very same area that I'm kind of working in the Lake Lahontan area, the Carson Sink area. And that's what we do. we look at the natural world in wonder and in awe. So with that, thank you very much. And I will get Jane's piece up here. She's going to show just a few pictures, and then we're going to chat. Let me just get this full frame. Brilliant. Okay.
You come up.
Oh, yeah, you want me up? Well, then I can't see the pictures, though.
No, but you have to come talk.
Okay. Oh, you're right, okay, we're going to talk while we're, awesome, okay. Great.
So you talked a little bit about O'Sullivan, and I thought it might be helpful to put together kind of a little montage of the great Western surveys to really hammer home how extraordinary this time period of the 1860s, 1870s in the West was for landscape photography. The top row are the railroad, and just a few of the Railroad Commission projects, including the Kansas Pacific Railway, which was photographed by Alexander Gardner in the 1867, the Union Pacific Railroad by A.J. Russell, 1868 to 69. And then in the row below are all government-sponsored surveys. The first of these great surveys was the King Survey that Michael has been showing some images from. Timothy O'Sullivan, here's another view of that fissure that he had shown. The Hayden Survey was the second in 67, 69, and 73. William Henry Jackson. A lot of the images of Yellowstone were taken during that survey. The Powell Survey, kind of the Southwest Canyonlands, so the Grand Canyon. Here we have a really beautiful image by James Fenimore, and I love this little guy perched on the rock at the very, very top. And then the Wheeler Survey, where Timothy O'Sullivan was also worked in one of his most famous images taken of the ancient ruins, 71 to 74. So I thought what was interesting about this when I was putting this together is how unusual Timothy O'Sullivan's King Survey image looks compared to all the rest of these images. And you talked a little bit about kind of this otherworldly quality, and you talked about using documentary photographs and whether they should be considered art or not. And I would argue that, why do we need to make why does there need to be a distinguish between art and documentary? Why can't they be both? Yeah. And kind of talking about your own work and how you feel, kind of about that notion.
Yeah, well, I've often speculated why Timothy O'Sullivan was so different from his contemporaries. Of course, he cut his teeth in the Civil War, and the first, photographs that he made were of extraordinary death and carnage on the battlefield. And I'm speculating, you know far more about him than I do, but I find his work has kind of an Old Testament austerity and what we would call minimalism, whereas, somebody like Henry Jackson is, doing very nice,
right,
perfectly solid, but a little more commercially conventional views. O'Sullivan is just, he risks more visually, and therefore, he comes up with unconventional. It's so interesting to see that same fissure without that figure.
I know.
And the steam, right? It's like night and day, and of course it's the same.
Well, he's really exploring this, alien world pictorially, and
right,
he's, although he was on the survey to kind of support what the geologists were doing, which was they were mapping the area, they were looking for resources like gold and silver, but he was also, he was not a scientist, so he was always, kind of reacting pictorially, and so there have been images that he's made where he's opaqued out, backgrounds, or he's, canted his camera so that, rocks that were straight up, appeared to be falling backwards.
Right.
And, some people have pointed to that as, oh, he's not really documenting. But I would say they're still the rocks.
Sure.
He's just reacting to it pictorially.
Yeah, yeah.
So I also kind of went through our collection and looked at some other images. So Carlton Watkins is probably one of the best known of the Western landscape photographers, and he made some of the earliest I would say some of the best images of Yosemite. This one we have from 1861. But Watkins was also commissioned by a silver company, the New Almaden mining company, to photograph, kind of these mining. And what struck me about this is it's not an aerial view of the mine, but it reminded me of your Bingham work and kind of this exploitation of the natural resources.
Yeah.
And I also thought that was pretty interesting, and I have to make a shameless plug for the California Gold Rush daguerreotype show. That's at the Nelson right now. But I would argue that, going back as early as the 1850s, so these are daguerreotypes, the earliest form of photography. Here we had people exploiting the resources of the region. They were out there, settling the West, and here they are, making a terrible mess of things. And California continues to kind of reel from what they were doing.
This is like the first new topographers.
That's right. So this is like early strip mining. I mean, this hydraulic mining. So they're blasting, high pressured water at these hillsides and washing away just huge chunks of earth and leaving, quite a wreck in their wake. They used mercury to, amalgamate the gold, and of course this polluted everything. So, we're kind of at the beginning of what you look at, a lot of times in your aerial work.
Sure. The Anthropic Sublime.
The title.
Anthropic Sublime.
Is that
There
what
it
we're
is.
talking about? So I also pulled some of our earliest aerial images. I thought they would be kind of fun to talk about. So Black and Batchelder,
Great title.
Oliver Wendell Holmes, on seeing the photograph, coined it, "Boston is the eagle and wild goose sees it," just very poetically. But Samuel King, who was an aeronaut, he was hired by a man who was interested in using the hot air balloon for mapping. And so they tethered this balloon in Boston and went up and took 6 negatives, and this is one of the 6. And then they untethered the balloon and took 12 more as they were floating away. But this really, gives you this bird's eye view, or this, this God's eye of the city of Boston. Yeah. And then the Brady Studio, we talked a lot of the survey work. It's the Topographical Army, Corps. It was in charge of that, and you talked about a lot of O'Sullivan being a Civil War photographer. So was Gardner. So was a lot of these early guys were. Right. But this is another use of a hot air balloon that was used by Professor Lowe to go up and see the Confederate troops, and they took a telegraph up with them, and they would signal down what was going on. So this very early use of photography for military purposes.
Control and reconnaissance.
But these photographers, did not actually fly their vehicles. They were just mechanisms, and you actually fly your plane while you're taking photos. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your choice to do that? Why you decided to take that on?
I guess I just, one thing kind of led to another. Full Moon was really an aerial project, obviously. If you keep on going, you wind up in space. Half the images, 100 Suns, were made via very, very high altitude aircraft, because the H-bomb detonations were so big that they had to be at 70 or 80,000 feet to photograph them. And as I mentioned, as a kid, I flew. I soloed, and I had a private pilot's license for engineless craft at 16, and then I kind of let it slide. I was always attracted to the aerial view for the scale, for that sort of immensity and the planetary scale of it. And I found myself After Full Moon, made a little bit of money, and after the project was mostly over, I was actually able to go out into the deserts and start making some of my own negatives, which felt fantastic. And I was renting small aircraft and pilots, but they had this strut in the way, and I was using this big 4x5 massive camera, and I tend to like to shoot low with a wide-angle lens. I don't use a telephoto. And one thing led to another, and Tom Hanks, bless him, was a great fan of Full Moon and brought me on to consult an IMAX movie that he did, point of view of astronauts on the surface of the moon. And that check from the IMAX Corporation bought my little tiny aircraft. So
Nice.
thanks, Hanks. And I named it Zoe, which is Greek for life, because I want to be, both a bold pilot and an old pilot, as the saying goes. But it just seemed like I needed an aircraft without that strut. And this German whole category of aircraft were allowed into the country in 2004, and I bought the aircraft in 2005. It seemed just kind of inevitable. I had the skill sets. It also was an amazing way for me to personally reconnoiter the West. So not only is it a great shooting platform, but it's a fantastic exploring platform. And it's different if you have your own aircraft. It also has very low operating costs. I can operate it for about $30 an hour, which, if you know aviation, that's pretty cheap. So for example, I can spend a day doing recon all around the Great Salt Lake. If I want to look at this, I want to look at this, okay, and I can compare and contrast. I don't know. And then I think there's also a level of physical commitment and just exploration in space that I enjoy. I'm also a scuba diver, and I don't make much work.
Of course you are.
Of course I am, right? Trevor Paglin calls me the Navy SEAL of aerial photographers. He's a friend of mine. He says that in a friendly way. But diving, I don't make work from diving, but it's, again, 3 dimensions. And you are flying. Your body becomes the platform, the aerial platform, through landscapes. And that is very important to me. Drones, for example, are interesting tools.
Well, I was going to ask you about
Fantastic tools. I mean, the technology is just shocking for what you get for the money. And, the ability to just pick a point in space and hover for 15 minutes. As a photographer, it's crazy, right? I can't do that in my fixed wing. I'm moving at 50 miles an hour in circles, right? Almost massaging or doing gravestone rubbings over a landscape. And I have drones, and I try and master drones. They are the most unrewarding experience as an artist. I want to be in space.
Yeah.
I don't want to robotically look at it through a video monitor.
Yeah, it's like a video game.
It's like, and they're noisy, and they have privacy implications that are complicated. So I really enjoy being, I enjoy being in the air. There's a vertigo and a destabilization that, for example, Terry Evans doesn't mind those fields the way I mind them. I want there to be a vortex. I think a lot about the Italian futurists, right, and the vorticists, painters who were painting during the First World War, after, right around that time. They very dynamic images of planes, kind of facing the ground as if they were just about to spiral in and hit. Those sorts of things. I want a viewer to be unsettled. And the only way I can really do that is if I'm in the plane making it unsettled.
Well, it's unusual. I mean, I would have to say for our audience that may not be, familiar with a lot of aerial photography, that you pilot your plane is really an interesting aspect and unusual aspect of your work.
Yeah.
So I also pulled an image by Steichen taken during World War I. He was a pilot, and I think most people, when you think of Steichen, you think of him as a high fashion photographer. But he was also part of the photographic division, and here he is flying over France. But when we look at this, it's so abstracted, and it really speaks to kind of a lot of the painting that was going on in the modern art movement during that time. And when I saw this image, I thought a lot of, several of your images and how you can't, really tell sometimes what we're looking at because it's so abstracted, and,
Well, removing the horizon is one great way to really confuse people.
Yeah. Up is down, down is up.
Yeah.
So you also talk about the Sublime, and I just wanted to read really quickly. So it's a art historical term from 1757.
Thank you for doing this.
You are welcome.
That's great.
It's by Edmund Burke. And
Yes.
so the Sublime is, it was a classification system about experiences and a way to articulate your feelings when you had an encounter with nature. And for Burke, a sublime landscape elicited feelings of horror, awe, and astonishment triggered by vastness, extreme height, peril, and ruggedness experienced in nature. And so I pulled a man on a quest for the sublime in the 19th century. So this is part of the William Bradford album. Bradford was a painter and was always looking for sublime experiences to, influence the way he was painting. And so he made journeys to the Arctic. And this was on his 7th trip to the Arctic, along with 30 of his closest friends, including 2 photographers, Dunmore and Richardson. And they photographed this incredible, landscape. And the other thing I thought was interesting, so you've got this little guy there that's, there for scale, but they also made use of text so that you could really understand how vast this was. And then all of these images with text were bound into this, folio it reminded me kind of the size of your, large books,
Right,
your large
right.
format books.
Right.
I thought you might appreciate that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I would say, the sublime for me is that point where humans kind of lose control or lose efficacy, or where their ego and competence begin to fall apart. And I'm very much interested in that edge. But I would also say, and the natural world, in the face of larger forces, the natural world certainly fulfills that for me. But I would also say, these days, again, picking up on what I said with the 100 Suns, we are our own sublime. So, there's terror, there's awe, there's amazement. Tool-bearing humans are pretty phenomenal. So it's looking at ourselves as well as these outside vastnesses. I mean, LA to me is just as sublime as the Bonneville Salt Flats or the Arctic or the moon.
Yeah. So that led me to Stieglitz and his equivalents. So Alfred Stieglitz fashioned this camera, and he would point it up at the sky and take images of clouds. And he took, just hundreds and hundreds of images of clouds and saw them as kind of evocative of emotion. And so I thought I'd show just a couple of these, talking about, looking at the natural world and really it having that kind of personal experience with it. And then I had to pull a couple moon pictures. This is one of our earliest by Louis Rutherford, who had a 15-foot telescope with an 11-inch lens fashioned so that he could make these kind of pioneering images of the moon that were really, as you can imagine, kind of extraordinary in the day. And then I had to do this one.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Of the surface of, you want to talk about this one?
Well, no, you go ahead.
So the surveyor went up to survey the moon to find a suitable landing for, the the craft. And when it would go up, it had this rotating mirror, and it would take these images, these still images that would be beamed back to the Earth, and then scientists would photograph the televised screen and stitch them together on this very elaborate, schemata to, give them the information that they were looking for. But to me, when I look at this, it's just really a beautiful, interesting way, and it's abstract,
Yep.
but yet it's of the moon. So
Yep.
it's kind of this play with this documentary and artistic.
Deeply scientific survey material. But the surveyor imagery and this compositing that came out of the surveyor. Surveyor was sent up to do a bunch of things, one of which was to prove that the moon was solid enough for a lunar lander with people to not sink into dust, however deep people thought it might be. But this type of imagery then went on to influence many contemporary artists, David Hockney's photography being but one of them. It's a kind of, almost a cubist, early modernist way of like looking at a landscape, but purely for the means of science and the survey.
That's really my last slide.
Very cool. Yeah.
That's for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And the Nelson-Atkins has that.
We do.
Ooh, lucky you.
We do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're at time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We have time for a few questions,
I hope so.
and then we will move on to the awarding of
Right.
prizes to the Art Institute students. We're videotaping and live streaming the program, so we want to get the audio of your questions on the video. So raise your hands, I'll come by with the microphone.
You may not be able to answer this. I was struck by the photographs of your discussion of the impact of humans on the landscape. But about 10 or 15 years ago, I read about the fact that in a place in North Dakota, people had moved off the farms, and there were counties in North Dakota that were no longer inhabited and going back to natural prairie. And I'm wondering if anybody's photographed sequentially the reverse phenomenon that you're talking about.
Well, it's really interesting you should bring that up because I didn't really have time to talk about it, but the Pleistocene lake work is a kind of meditation on writing and mark making and then erasure. And it's almost like, sort of a giant Pleistocene etch-a-sketch. And as a metaphor for how we inhabit the earth, it's very deep and rich territory. The eminent biologist E.O. Wilson, who's well in his 80s now, approaching 90s, and has the kind of liberated quality of being, of throwing out a modest proposal, wrote a book maybe a year or two ago called Half Earth, in which he posits the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, the biome, the living part of the planet that's not us, might survive if we retracted to, say, half the planet, half the surface of the planet, leaving the rest of the half of the planet for all the other many living things that we, that our actions tend to imperil. And so I think about this a lot, and the concept of reversion of landscape after habitation and transformation is of great interest to me, and I think it'd be a great idea to go photograph it, actually. It's of course, we all know how quickly, if you have a backyard to maintain, how quickly things take over if you don't stay on them, which is a kind of cause for optimism, for me at least. So,
Next question, anybody?
We answered them all.
All right. All right. Well, I tell you what, we'll move into the prize portion of tonight's events, and I would like the students who are here to come up on stage.
so we'll come.
So
we'll
we can stay up here too, but let's let's pull the furniture back a
Yeah.
little bit, if you don't mind. And
Yeah.
we'll make some room. And Mike judged the artwork this afternoon during a
did.
tour of the library.
I did. A heavy responsibility on my head, I might add,
Oh, you
but a
don't wanna-
great privilege.
So
Not
we'll,
yet?
we'll
You'll
call the names. We'll call the names,
Yeah.
and you can come up on stage. We have 3 honorable mentions. And I'll need my glasses for these, and they should be in order, and
Okay.
I'll read the names.
Okay, let me get my glasses. I need my glasses too.
And these are $50 prizes for, and we have 3 honorable mention award winners. The first is Coral Rose.
Coral, yay! Congratulations.
Her project is titled Pick Up the Claws and Put Them On. It's a cyanotype and watercolor, and it's in the southeast corner of the East Gallery. Second honorable mention is Nathan Lewis. I know he was here earlier.
Okay.
He actually has 2 pieces in the exhibition. The winning piece was Lunch Hour Flowers. It's a dry print intaglio. And the third honorable mention is Angel Shanholtz.
Voila.
Invisible
My
Friend.
pleasure.
It's a mixed media installation in the west windowsill. It's a lithograph, watercolor, gouache, paper, fabric, and clay. And now the third prize winner, it's $100. It goes to Hazel Adolphi, if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly.
Way to go. Cheers.
Hazel's art piece is titled Dual Tone Series. It's on the east wall. It's acetate, spray paint, paper prints, and prints on fabric. Second prize is Haley Bray.
That's you, all right.
Haley's project is Trapped in Glass, and it's the 4 pieces on the column in the East Gallery. It's photolithography and monoprints on laser-engraved polycarbonate. Congratulations, Haley. And the first prize winner, and I asked her, I tried to be casual about it. I asked her how to pronounce her last name, and now she knows why. And now I'll see if I can get it right again. It's first prize winner, it's a $300 prize, is Genesis Kousiafis.
Woohoo!
And if you've been in the East Gallery, Genesis' art piece is titled Chaos in Cyan. It's the hanging fabric along the north wall. It's a cyanotype on bamboo rayon with hints of dye. So congratulations, Genesis, and to all the winners. And that concludes this evening's events. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah.
No
Thank you,
problem.
Michael, and thank you to all the students who participated in the exhibition. If the winners could stay up for a photo, you can come back up on stage. Thank you for attending tonight's exhibition opening and program. The exhibit's going to be on view until March 14th, so you have plenty of time to see it if you have not had a chance to spend time there tonight. So thank you and good night.
Congrats, guys. It was not easy.